Welcome to the Wall to Wall podcast, brought to you by Wall EdTech, where your host, Jared and Kari Wall's passion for technology and learning come together to bring you up-to-date information on what's going on in and out of the classroom. From the latest apps and best practices to current trends, this podcast is Wall to Wall EdTech.
Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Wall to Wall podcast brought to you by Wall EdTech. Today we're on episode 18 where we talk about leveraging the power of technology, about innovation and creativity. So I'm here with my co-host, Jared.
Hello, how's everybody doing today?
All right, so we had an amazing response to our last podcast, episode 17, about teacher burnout. And so on this episode, we kind of wanted to follow up on a couple of things. So we're going to pick up kind of where we left off on our last episode. And since we've identified multiple key issues that lead to teacher burnout, how can we rethink teaching and learning in light of technology in our classroom? So on the last episode, we addressed a whole lot of issues, and we were addressing an article that you had ran across and we had talked about, and it led to great discussion, and we got a tremendous amount of feedback on that particular episode. And so all of that being said, we've got lots of interesting things to talk about this week. So you want to talk to us about our news and notes?
Before we get started with this week's episode, some notes and some news worth mentioning. Wall EdTech is proud to be a presenter on March the 16th at the LSU Department of Education's conference entitled Innovative Practices and Techniques, a Cross-Fertilization of the Immersion, ESL, and Second Language Classrooms. In short, there is a world language educators conference at LSU, sponsored by the Department of Ed at LSU, and we will be offering a session to world language educators that highlights some technology tools that can be beneficial to learning and teaching new language learners. So we're thrilled to be a part of that conference. This is their first conference of this sort, and we're really excited to be asked to join in on that. So if you're there, or if you're planning to be there, look for us. Our session, again, will cover some tools you might be able to use technology-wise that might make the immersion into that language, or how students are learning that language in your classroom, a little more beneficial. Also, we have our flip grid. If you want to share with us any of your comments or thoughts on our last podcast, as we've already said, it was one of our most listened to podcast ever in a huge way, and we appreciate all of you who clicked to listen. So if you want to share your ideas on that last podcast, which was teacher burnout, or if you want to share ideas that come to mind from this podcast, which is about leveraging the power of technology in light of these issues that have come up, we'd love to hear from you. Just visit our show notes or go to walledtech.com, and on the front page you'll see a link to our flip grid along with some links to some other tools you might be interested in, along with some of our past podcasts where we interview some people. Our language learners, as we're coming up on March 16th, we do have our archived interview with Miss Viviana Tracy, who is a Spanish middle school Spanish teacher who's one of our good friends, and who we really like to talk to from time to time to feel the pulse of the world language classroom. So you can check all of that out there. We also have some technology tools and trends to talk about. If you are not on Twitter and you're an educator, go get yourself a Twitter account. I think Ms. Wall can tell you a little bit about what she does with Twitter as far as just her professional learning.
Well, we use Twitter a lot. Wall EdTech, we post stuff, but we do way more reading about other things people are doing in their classrooms than what we are actually posting. And so a lot of the tools and things that I have used is things that I've gotten ideas from Twitter. If I see something posting, say, just about, they talk about trends, they talk about all different kinds of new tools. And so sometimes I see something and I'm like, let me check this out. So I check this out, and it's something that, okay, while I may not can use it, or I'm not using it the way that person's using it, then I can make it fit for my classroom or share with other teachers because it might be something that they can use. Also, there's the language, I'm using language chats because we've got our focus kind of on the world language, but about using hashtags and being able to do chats across across Twitter using the technology that's at our disposal. And so you can search by different hashtags and you follow a particular hashtag and you're able to have conversations across the board. And this is not conversations through your classroom or through your school or your district. This is across the world. And so people get on and, teachers learn a lot from other teachers and use things that other teachers are using. And so this is an excellent way to get your own professional learning community and building that network and having your own PLC and just learning as you go. Whenever you have time, just search for a particular hashtag and say EdTech, hashtag EdTech. You're going to get way more than you ever thought you could. And so this is just a way for a teacher to have another resource and to get a quick PLC and to learn something new. Because as teachers, we should always be continuing our education as well.
And one of the trends I'm seeing, not just getting on Twitter, but what I really wanted to hammer home here is this idea of a Twitter chat. And I've seen these being pushed out by different organizations, whether it be school districts or other organizations, where they go and they grab a relevant hashtag about their topic and they invite other educators into that PLC, and then they might have an expert that day who is going to lead the chat. And so if you follow that hashtag, that person, and they give you the time that the chat starts, they start posting their questions, which are usually visual. They've got them set up beforehand, and they ask a question, and then all the people following the chat can respond to the question, or the expert might respond, and it leads to conversation and responses among the people in the PLC. And so you got all of this learning going on that you can follow. That's almost like having a PLC, but not actually at school, but this wider audience of educators or professionals that you're learning from. So really hitting that idea that not just getting on Twitter for Twitter's sake, it's a great place to learn, but that they have these Twitter chats that are happening all over Twitter now that you can join in.
And they happen at various times. So I've seen them on Sunday mornings. I've seen them on Saturdays, like during the day, late at night. So there's bound to be something that you can fit into your schedule because, you're busy.
Right.
So.
And if you can't be there live, you can always go back and follow that hashtag and read all the comments later on at your leisure and follow up on that. Tools to talk about. What I've noticed trending on Twitter lately is Nearpod. Nearpod is a great tool if you're not familiar with it. We're not going to spend a lot of time here, but if you need a tool for guiding your students through your notes. So if you're the kind of teacher who puts a PowerPoint together with all of your lecture notes or whatever the topic is for the day, or even Google Slides, you can automatically import those into Nearpod, give your students a code, and then it takes over their screen. And then instead of having your kids look up at your screen at the front of the room, or if you don't have a screen, it puts those slides on your student's device, whether that's bring your own device. So they could be a tablet, it could be a phone, it could be a laptop or a desktop. It puts your slides right on their screen. But more than that, if you need some formative assessment, want to make sure they're getting what you're teaching, it lets you add questions, short answer, multiple choice, collect that as you go to see if the students have got it. It lets you add websites that you can send students to, embed videos, anything you can imagine, virtual field trips. Nearpod lets you do this. And one of the fantastic things about it is you can flip your classroom. So if you want to make it a student paced lesson rather than you doing it live in class, you can set these up so students go through these lessons on their own at their own pace, but you still collect the information on how they're doing with the learning and where they've been on the tool. So if you need a way to do that in your classroom, consider Nearpod. I think that would be one of the best tools you could look at. And then if you're a Google teacher, there's also Ms. Wall?
Well, there's also Pear Deck, and Pear Deck is very similar to Nearpod. It is not student-paced, however, but it is a great way for formative assessments. So you just, it's an add-on for Google Slides, and you're able to collect all kinds of information. You, just like Nearpod, you're able to add questions, and they can do like different slides. You can make different slides do different things, and so you can have short answer, multiple choice. Students can draw, so if you want them to circle something to identify different things, you can. Also, you're able to I think this is worth saying about Nearpod is that you're able to embed different websites onto your slides. So if you're having a student do research and you're limited, or you want to limit them where they can search for different things, especially the younger kids, people are always afraid they're going to come across something they shouldn't, then that's a good way to do that. But both of these tools are excellent for formative assessment and for just giving extra things for students to do, and to think more critically about the topic that y'all happen to be talking about that particular day.
All right, so that's our news and our tech tools and trends, and that gets us to the part of our podcast where we're going to talk about our main content for today. And again, that is leveraging the power of technology, using that technology for innovation and creativity. And what brings this topic up, again, we've already discussed our last podcast and the issues of teacher burnout. Again, just an article that talked about some of the reasons that teachers are fleeing the profession. Many like to think it's pay or kids that aren't well behaved, but the truth is those aren't the real reasons teachers leave education, as we discussed in the letters that were in the article. Some of those things included the increased pressure of standardization of test scores and data. A lot of teachers feeling the crunch there. What we want to talk about, and something that I've come across, is what can be done about what's leading to teacher burnout? Is there a different way to think about teaching and learning, about schooling, and about education in general, so that maybe we can undo these things that are leading to teacher burnout? And I ask this because I think technology is one of the answers to that question. But even in the answer, when we say technology is an answer, that's fraught with problems as well. And I'll just give you an example. I think technology is a great way to open up the classroom, to embrace uniqueness, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But if we only think of technology as a tool to continue the same type of learning or teaching and learning that we're already using, then technology is really not a change agent for this new way of learning. And the reason I say that is in the last few weeks or so, I've had several teachers approach me who said, I have been asked to find a way to stop making so many copies. So the problem that was presented is not, we need you to learn how to use technology in a way that makes learning interesting or productive for students, but we need you to use the technology so we can save money on the copy budget, which, if you're just using technology to take your worksheet and instead of printing it, putting on a computer, yeah, you may have saved some money for the school or the district as far as copies go, but you really haven't done anything to address changing the way that teaching and learning is happening. And if you're teaching the same way that we taught 20 years ago, you're just using a new tool to present the information, you really haven't improve the way that education is happening in your classroom. And I think that's a bad way to approach that situation from, well, I just want to keep doing the same thing. I'll just put it I'll use Google Docs to create my worksheet. And so my students can just type their answer in instead of write it. I don't think does anything to promote what we're talking about in alleviating teacher burnout through a new way of teaching. So what I've written here is that in light of the issues we've discussed, how can we re-envision school in a way that gets rid of issues like data madness, student standardization, micromanagement, and then embraces the idea that teachers and students are unique, that teachers are unique professionals who can and should do things that work, but in their own way as they're learning to teach, and also that students are unique learners who have different interests, that have different life stories, that we're not all going to be standardized or conformed into that same thing. We can't all learn the same way. We can't all teach the exact same way. And we need to embrace that idea that we're all unique. And so when we talk about embracing uniqueness, I wanted to kind of start with a book that I'm reading. It's called The Metaphysical Club, A Story of Ideas in America by Louis Menand. And in chapter 8, he has a chapter that's titled The Law of Errors. And I learned this as I read this, that the law of errors is the history of the development of statistical formulas that were imposed upon social issues. In other words, these scientists came up with the idea as they looked out in the 17 and 1800s, and they were measuring things as astronomers tried to measure planets, or as they tried to measure things as in maritime terms, if they were looking for the best path, or let's say if they were trying to measure latitude and longitude. When different people would do these measures, they would always come back with slightly different measurements. And that didn't make sense to people. If that star is out there, it's got to be a certain location. And why would 2 or 3 different astronomers get different locations? And then they started to understand that it depends on the tool you're using to view it, the location where you're viewing it from. It may depend on the gases surrounding that star at any moment. Those things change from moment to moment. And so what they realized was we can make a mathematical formula that looks at all the errors we make, and it gives us an average of about where that star would be located. What happens in science, however, is that this was taken and people decided we can take this data, this law of errors, and we can apply it to society, not just external things in nature. So if we can use it to know about where a star is located, why can't we look at human data as we collect it as societies? And they figured out that they could come up with this idea of the law of the average man, that if we studied the behaviors of human beings over the course of time, we can come up with a model that would predict what the average man would do. And lo and behold, the picture that forms is the bell curve. Oh, the old teacher's bell curve. Yes. So if you take statistical data on your students over time, they should conform to a bell curve that, statistically speaking, the average student would fall in the middle of. And then you would have your outliers at either end. And so the law of errors was used to make sure that these people that escape the average, we have a way to show that they are the outliers. They're not really in the middle, which is what we're looking at in human behavior. And of course, this led to the idea of determinism, which means we can look out across these trends and say, well, this is what the average man should be. And so these numbers determine whether or not you're successful or whether or not you're meeting the standards that society wants you to meet. And so these become, of course, your test scores, your GPA, predictors of student success and worth. And so these are some of those things that we believe are feeding into this idea of teacher burnout, that we have to look at students on these bell curves, their GPA, their test scores, and then we're making decisions on how to move them along this continuum of this bell curve so that they're where we think they need to be. And then students, on the other hand, are seeing themselves in relation to GPA and test scores and thinking, okay, I'm a good student and I'm going to be okay, or I'm a C or a D student and there's not much hope for me. Well, what do we do to change that in teaching? I think that's one of the questions that I wanted to get to with this episode. And so since we're Wall EdTech, I wanted to bring in, how does technology allow us to make the shift from students as standardizations to opening up the curriculum to possibility and to uniqueness and to let students be who they are. So what are your thoughts on
one
that?
of the things with technology, I'm going to give you the pros and a con here, but we talked about on the last episode about how students are more than just a number. They're more than the number they represent for your school, for your district, whatever, when they walk through that door. And they're all individuals and they're all unique. And so technology allows us to track that data that everyone's pushing and wanting to get so much of, and it gives us a way to quickly break things down and analyze them and all of this. And we talked about that last episode, but technology gives us another tool, a resource on how to embrace that uniqueness and let students be their own person and let them research things that interest them, and they can still learn and still accomplish the same objective that you have for that day, or for what your overall goal is for that course even. But technology gives them a way to do this. Now, used to, I mean, even back when I was in college still, we had to go to the library. You had to go check out this book. You had to request this book to do basic research. And now everything's at your fingertips. You just type it in Google and there it pops up. Why not let students research things or look into things or learn things about stuff that they're interested in, and how can they apply this to real world, because that's what they're interested in. They're not interested in necessarily math, but if they know how learning math will affect them with what it is that they're interested in, say they're interested, they like to build stuff, or they're interested in, science and all of these different things. Well, there's a certain part of math that goes into that. So if you can make it applicable to them in a real life scenario on something that interests them, that's catering to their uniqueness and being creative, then technology, oh my goodness, technology opens up a million different ways for you to be able to do that, and for the student to be able to express themselves in a way that they feel comfortable with, and they're researching something, they're looking into something and learning something that interests them, and make it applicable in real world for them. So show them, because they don't always understand, I don't need to know that. I'm never going to use this again. I mean, how many times as a teacher have you heard this, especially, from middle and high school students? And by putting it in a perspective for them, okay, so right, you may not always need this. However, what is it that you're interested in? So you see that they're interested in something, you're able to expand on that, and then they kind of say, oh, well, maybe I do need to know how to do this in math or in English or whatever it happens to be. So all technology does with this is just open up so many more possibilities for the teacher to allow the student to be creative, search, and learn something that they're interested in. And then you can expand on that as the teacher.
And I think that you make some great points here, that if we find a way to embed our learning in real world issues, we connect students to their community. And I think that's one of the things we fail to do. When we bring kids into school, we kind of shut the doors on everything else, and we learn English for English's sake. Pardon me. We learn science for science's sake so we can pass whatever that standardized test is. But I often told my students, if your end goal is to pass a standardized test, then what next? You pass the test, what's next? What are you going to do with this information now? Are you done with it? Or is what happens to learning after that test? If you don't have a goal past that, then what is the point of what we're doing? And so I think what we have to do is, if we can ground our students' education in something real, something they're passionate about, something in their community that they can research, that actually involves much more than just English or just math or just science, but maybe brings all of that in together. But ultimately, what technology does, as you say, is it opens doors that previously weren't open. So now if I want a guest speaker in my classroom, I don't have to schedule somebody to come in. I can use an online video chat to bring somebody in. I can watch YouTube videos where these people talk about their topic already, and we can just watch the videos on that. We can read articles from other voices. All of these things can be brought in through technology, so that we're enriching those conversations past what was in a textbook or what the teacher thought needed to be said on this, and it lets students get a more diverse perspective. Also, I think one of the biggest things here is the collaboration and the innovation and the creativity that technology allows. So instead of, I'm going to go over this, we're going to learn this material so we can take a multiple choice test, let's go through this so that we can think critically, which I think is a skill we're losing. Mm-hmm. Can we do this research? Can we ask our own questions? Can we think critically in our classroom community and beyond? Because technology lets us break down those walls and bring other people in. Let's collaborate to solve a problem. Can we think of an innovative solution that maybe somebody else hasn't thought about? And then let's give students a way to create, so that learning becomes concrete for them and something that they can present, something that they can keep with them. And then now we've given them the tools when they move out of school and into life to think, to research, to ask questions, to work in their community collaboratively, and then to create something that can be lasting. And I think that is where A lot of the things that I see trending about technology on Twitter is this move from standardization and conformity, like let's pass a test. That's not what technology is about.
No.
It is about the breaking down of those barriers. Like, let's get rid of the walls of the classroom, and the power of creation with technology is, in order to create something, you have to have learned, understood something, and then used what you've learned to make something new. And I think that's one of the things that we need to embrace about what technology can do in the classroom. And I think in doing that, we are going to open up the curriculum rather than close it down. And what we're going to see is educators who have a new passion and a new zeal for what they do, because now it's not, okay, I've been given this curriculum, what can I do with this closed set of ideas that I'm expected to teach? And we become what we came into the profession for. We're unique, creative thinking professionals who want to have a say in what we're teaching, and it opens up the possibilities for what we can offer students as guides in their learning process and teaching them to be learners. And I think it also opens up the possibilities for the student, where you may have a student who all of this time thought, well, this is English, I don't really understand it, my test scores are bad, so I'm going to sit here, ignore it, get sent to clinic because I refuse to work, be put in timeout room, maybe get suspended because all I want to do is act out because I'm not interested in this. And all of a sudden, I'm saying, well, what does interest you? Let's talk about what interests you. Bring in some research. Get online. Teach me about what it is. Create me a website or create a video for me about what interests you. And now I've got a student who before thought it was all about one thing, and we've opened the possibilities to let them actually become a learner. And I think this starts moving towards a solution to what is ailing the education or public school at the moment.
One of the things that I've done in the past is, how Google does the whole Genius Hour thing. And so I've done that where 20% of their class time goes into researching and doing something on what they want to do. And so I give them a rubric to follow, and they have choices, they have options on how they want to present their information, whether it be a podcast, whether it be a presentation like a PowerPoint or Google Slides. They can write, which nobody goes for that, but who knows, maybe one day I'll have that student who just likes to write. But I give them several different options, and I tell them, this is what I want you to find out. So they choose any topic that they want, and they have to clear it with me, because I've had, inappropriate things, but as long as it's cleared with me, they research on something they're interested in. And then based on the information that you have found out, how do you want to present that information? And so they have several different ways that they can present the information. They have the rubric to follow, and in each one of the possibilities of presenting this information, they're able to, I have it set with the requirements for that. So make sure that you cover why you're interested in this and all the different things about it. But my kids loved that. Now, I taught middle school, then I moved to high school. So some of the same students that I taught in middle school, I'm teaching now in high school. And I've had a couple of my students who have asked me, Miss Wall, when do we get to do that Genius Hour project? I really liked that. They enjoy researching something that they want to learn more about. And without technology, it would be much harder for this to happen. And they enjoyed it. And I didn't, at the time, I don't guess I really realized how much they enjoyed it, but they liked that it was their own. It was something, they had all these different choices of how they want to present this information. They knew what they were looking for about this topic, but everyone had a different topic. Everyone discussed something different, presented different kinds of information in various ways. And without technology, that would have been much harder to do. So technology just opens up for so many things. But if you're using technology just to use it, who cares? You want to use it, like we've said, to inspire them, to have, for them to be creative, for them to find their passion. And use it in that way. Well, you've taken teaching and learning to a whole different level, rather than, we're using a computer. Nobody cares if you're using a computer. What are you doing with that technology is what makes the difference.
And I think we've had a great conversation on this podcast to kind of move us forward in thinking about that. We'd love to hear what you have to say about it. If you'd like to visit our Flipgrid, or you can send us an email at jared@walledtech.com or Kari@walledtech.com. But we'd rather hear from you if you go to our website and click on the Flipgrid link. Let us know, what are you doing with technology that allows for creation and collaboration and innovation in your classroom, and are you seeing any results with that? We'd love to hear some of those stories about how you're using it and how effective that is.
As teachers, we learn from each other, and
Absolutely.
so I learn a lot from Jared, and he picks up on some of my ideas at times. I pick up on more of his than he does mine, but I learn
Not
from
true.
the Twitter, from all these things. So
We listen to podcasts.
We do. We learn from others. So share with us what you're doing, and we would like. You may give me a great idea and something I could use. So I'm always for it.
Our next episode, we will. I think we're going to turn our discussion back to the topic that came up right before Christmas that we've gotten a little bit of feedback on, which is, what are you using in your classroom to teach when you can't be there? So we'll get focused back on some of those particular tools, and we'll even have a couple of educators telling us what they use. We'll play their audio for you. If you want to get in on that, feel free to leave a message on the Flipgrid again with any tools or ways you are using technology to basically keep the learning happening when you are not at school, when you have to be out when you're ill or you have professional development. And we'd love to hear from you on that as well. It's been our pleasure to be here with you today, and we'll see you next time. For Kari,
bye.
This is Jared Wall, and we'll see you next time on Wall to Wall Podcast.
Thank you for listening to Wall to Wall Podcast. You can get all of our podcasts by subscribing to Wall to Wall Podcast on iTunes. For more resources, visit walledtech.com. You can follow us on Twitter or find us on Facebook. Just search for Wall EdTech. If you have questions, comments, or things you want us to talk about, visit Wall EdTech and send us an email, tweet, or message us on Facebook. We look forward to hearing from you.